All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into some fascinating concepts from the spiritual teacher Osho.
Okay.
We're talking about witnessing and no mind.
Mm.
And we're going to be looking at excerpts from one of his spoken word recordings called The Master Key Witnessing and Meditation.
Interesting.
And the big question we're exploring today is, how can the practice of witnessing lead to the state of no mind? And why should you care?
Sounds like a journey inward.
It is. Osho starts by comparing witnessing to like planting a seed that eventually blossoms into no mind.
Right.
But what's interesting is he doesn't shy away from the fact that this takes time and dedication.
Absolutely. It's not some instant quick fix or anything.
No.
Witnessing is about really cultivating a new way of relating to your thoughts and feelings. Instead of getting swept away by them, you learn to observe them without judgment.
Yeah,
Kind of like watching clouds drift by.
I like that visual.
Yeah.
But Osho goes even further.
Right.
He calls thoughts parasites.
Yeah.
He says, thoughts don't have their own life. They are parasites. They live on the identity with them.
Wow.
And that's a strong statement.
Yeah.
What do you think he's getting at with that?
It's a pretty provocative way of saying that we give our thoughts power by identifying with them.
Okay.
You know, just think about it. When you get caught up in a negative thought like, I'm not good enough or I'm going to fail,
All right.
it's like you're merging with that thought, letting it define you.
It's almost like we're feeding the thought, giving
Yeah.
it energy and permission to like take over.
Exactly. But witnessing breaks that cycle.
Okay.
By simply observing the thought, you create a separation between yourself and you're no longer fueling it with your energy and it loses its grip on you.
Okay, so how do we actually put this into practice?
Yeah.
How do we start cultivating that observer perspective?
Right.
Because Osho tells this amazing story about a young boy sent to a Tibetan monastery at just 6 years old to learn meditation. And the boy's family is completely dedicated to this experiment of expanding consciousness, as Osho calls it. And they make a huge sacrifice by sending him away for years.
That's right. Imagine being 6 years old
Yeah.
and told to never look back as you ride away from your family.
Wow.
Yeah, and the boy's commitment to this path is apparent from day one.
Yeah, and then when he arrives at the monastery, he has to pass a test,
Ah.
just sitting outside the gate all day, unmoving with closed eyes. Talk about patience.
Oh my gosh.
He had to endure hunger, thirst, even flies landing on his face.
Ugh.
And this was just the beginning of his training.
I can't even imagine.
So wild.
It's such a vivid illustration of the dedication and discipline it takes to reach a state of no mind. Now, obviously, most of us aren't going to be sent off to a monastery at the age of 6.
Right.
But there's a powerful lesson there about committing to the practice of witnessing, even in small daily ways.
It makes me wonder if those tiny moments of awareness throughout our day, those little wins where we catch ourselves getting swept away and choose to observe instead, if those could add up over time and create a similar shift in our consciousness.
That's a really intriguing question. What do you think? Could those small acts of witnessing be like micro doses of that same training the boy received at the monastery?
I think that's a great way to put it. It's like those microdoses are strengthening our witnessing muscle over time.
Yeah.
Which actually reminds me, you mentioned earlier that witnessing feels beautiful to you. I'd love to hear more about that. Why do you think this practice evokes that sense of beauty?
Well, for me, it's the peace that comes from not being constantly at the mercy of my thoughts and emotions.
Right.
It's like stepping off a roller coaster and finally finding solid ground.
Got it.
You're no longer being tossed around by every mental and emotional wave.
Right. It's exhausting to be on that roller coaster. 1 minute you're up, the next you're down. It's like you're a puppet being controlled by your thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. And Osho even talks about those gaps in thought that start to appear when you practice witnessing. Those moments of quiet between the mental chatter, they're significant, especially in today's world where our minds are bombarded with information and stimulation.
Totally.
Even brief experiences of thoughtlessness can be incredibly refreshing.
I was starting to think of them like mental palate cleansers. They give you a little taste of what's possible when you're not entangled in your thoughts all the time.
Right.
But speaking of those gaps, there's a common misconception that no mind means having no thoughts at all,
Right.
which can feel pretty intimidating.
Definitely no mind isn't about erasing your thoughts or becoming some kind of zombie. It's about changing your relationship with your mind so that it's no longer the one calling the shots.
So it's less about the absence of mind and more about mastering it.
Exactly. It's like you're learning to use your mind as a tool rather than letting it use you.
Which makes me think of the analogy of the mind as a servant.
Right.
A good servant can be incredibly helpful, but they shouldn't be the ones running the household.
I love that. And when the mind is no longer the master, you tap into a whole new level of creativity, freedom, and spontaneity.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but this raises an interesting question. What does it actually look like to use the mind as a tool without being controlled by it?
Right.
How do we know when we're slipping back into old patterns?
That's a great question. It seems like the line between those two states can be pretty blurry sometimes.
It definitely can be, and that's something we'll explore more deeply as we continue this deep dive into the nuances of witnessing and no mind.
I can't wait to unpack that further. But for now, let's shift gears and talk about something else that really struck me about Osho's teachings, the power of his words.
Okay.
There's a certain weight and authority to them, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with the fact that he was speaking from a place of no mind.
Right.
It's like his words were coming from a wellspring of deep inner stillness and clarity.
That's so interesting. So how does that state of no mind actually impact the words we speak?
Well, when you're not clouded by your own thoughts, opinions, and biases, your words flow from a deeper source, a place of connection to universal truth.
Okay.
And that authenticity resonates with people on a much deeper level.
It's like those words bypass all the usual mental filters and go straight to the heart.
Right.
And Osho describes this so beautifully when he says, words from no mind don't need any arguments. They become their own argument. I love that.
What's fascinating here is how this concept resonates with other spiritual traditions and wisdom teachings throughout history.
Yeah, you're right. Think about figures like Buddha Jesus or Gandhi.
Right.
Their words weren't just clever arguments. They
Yeah.
carried a weight of truth that seemed to transcend the need for explanation.
Exactly. And I think that speaks to the power of tapping into that state of no mind.
Right?
The words themselves become the truth, the evidence, the undeniable reality.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how do we as ordinary people even begin to access that kind of clarity and authenticity in our own lives? It feels like such a lofty goal.
It's a great question. And one we'll definitely delve into further as we continue our deep dive into Osho's insights on witnessing and no mind.
Perfect. We were just talking about the power of speaking and even living from a state of no mind.
Right.
It's a pretty amazing concept, but it also feels kind of out there.
Yeah.
Like, how do we actually cultivate that kind of presence and clarity in a world that's constantly pulling us in different directions?
Well, you've hit on a key point. It's a process.
Right.
It's a journey. Remember Osho's analogy of the seed and the flower?
Yeah.
It all starts with planting that seed with the practice of witnessing.
Right. And we're not trying to shut down our thoughts completely.
No, not at all.
It's more about shifting our relationship to them.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Witnessing isn't about stopping thoughts. It's about observing them without judgment,
Okay.
creating that space between yourself and the thought so you're not automatically swept away.
And as we practice, we start to notice those gaps, those moments of stillness that Osho talked about,
Right.
appearing more and more often.
Exactly. Those gaps are like little previews of what no mind feels like. Proof that we can experience peace and clarity even amidst the busyness of life.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to your earlier question. Can those small everyday moments of witnessing really add up to create a lasting shift?
Right.
I think they absolutely can.
So it's not about waiting for some grand life-altering retreat or years spent in a monastery.
No, that doesn't have to be.
It's about making the most of those little opportunities for awareness throughout the day.
Exactly. Each time we catch ourselves getting lost in thought and choose to step back and observe, it's like we're strengthening that witnessing muscle.
Yeah, I like that.
And over time, that muscle gets stronger, allowing us to access those states of peace and clarity more easily and more frequently.
Okay, so those little moments matter. But what about when we're really struggling?
Right.
When we're stressed, anxious, overwhelmed?
Yeah.
It feels a lot harder to access that observer perspective in those moments.
It definitely can be. But remember, those challenging moments are also incredible opportunities for growth.
Okay.
When you're feeling overwhelmed by a wave of thoughts and emotions, that's your cue to practice witnessing.
So instead of getting swept away, we pause and ask, what's happening in my mind right now? What am I feeling?
Exactly. Bring that same mindful awareness you practice in meditation to those difficult situations. You're not trying to suppress or deny your thoughts and feelings. You're simply acknowledging them without judgment.
And by doing that, we're creating space, that buffer zone we talked about earlier,
Yes.
between ourselves and those intense experiences.
And that space allows us to respond to the situation with more wisdom and compassion rather than just reacting impulsively.
It's like we're taking back the reins, reclaiming our power from those runaway thoughts and emotions,
Hmm.
which, if I'm understanding correctly, is really at the heart of no mind.
Yeah.
It's not about becoming emotionless or thoughtless. It's
Yeah.
about being the conscious captain of our own mental and emotional ship.
That's a great way to put it. And when we're no longer ruled by those reactive patterns,
Yeah.
we can start to navigate life with more clarity, peace, and even joy.
It's a pretty radical shift in perspective,
It is.
but also incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
It's like realizing that we have a choice in how we relate to those difficult thoughts and feelings.
Absolutely. And that choice, that freedom to choose our response is a key aspect of no mind.
So to bring this back to our listeners, what are some practical things they can start doing today to cultivate this state of no mind in their own lives?
Well, mindfulness meditation is a powerful tool, as we've mentioned. It's all about training our minds to be present, to notice when we've drifted off into thought, and to gently bring our attention back to the present moment.
Okay, so we're bringing that same witnessing energy to our everyday experiences.
Right.
What else can we do?
Well, think about the activities you already do throughout the day.
Okay.
Walking, showering, washing dishes.
Right.
Can you bring a sense of mindfulness to those activities? Can you be fully present with the sensations of your body, the sounds around you, the sights, the smells?
So it's not about adding more to our already busy lives.
Right.
It's about infusing our existing routines with more presence and awareness.
Exactly. And even small moments like these can make a big difference. As you practice, you'll start to notice how often your mind wanders.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's not about beating ourselves up for having thoughts. It's about gently guiding our attention back to the present moment.
It's like we're training a puppy. You have to keep redirecting its attention until it learns to stay focused.
It's a great way to put it.
Speaking of focus, how do we know when we've actually reached a state of no mind?
Right.
Is there a specific feeling or experience that signals we've arrived?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to remember that no mind isn't a destination. It's a journey. It's not something you achieve once and then you're done. It's an ongoing process of cultivating awareness, presence, and freedom from the grip of our thoughts.
So it's less about checking off a box and more about continuously deepening our understanding and experience of these concepts.
Exactly. And the more we practice, the more those moments of peace, clarity, and spaciousness will naturally arise in our lives.
Okay.
We may find that we're less reactive in challenging situations,
Yeah.
more creative in our work, and more connected to ourselves and the world around us.
That sounds pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah.
But it also makes me wonder if no mind isn't about eliminating thoughts completely.
Right.
How do we know if we're using our minds as a tool or if our minds are using us?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's something that even experienced practitioners grapple with.
Right.
But I think there are some telltale signs that can help us discern between those two states.
I'm all ears. What are those signs?
Well, one clue is to pay attention to how you feel when you're engaged in thought.
Okay.
Are you feeling peaceful, energized, and focused? Or are you feeling stressed, anxious, and drained?
So if our thoughts are leading us down a rabbit hole of worry and negativity, that's a sign that our minds might be running the show.
Exactly. It's like being on autopilot, reacting to situations based on old programming, rather than responding consciously from a place of clarity and awareness.
And the more we practice witnessing, the easier it becomes to recognize those patterns and make a conscious choice about how we want to respond.
Precisely. And that's where the real freedom lies, in that ability to choose.
So in a nutshell, what would you say are the key ingredients for cultivating no mind and integrating it into our daily lives?
I'd say it comes down to three things: awareness, acceptance, and action.
Okay.
Awareness of our thoughts and feelings, acceptance of those thoughts and feelings without judgment, and action aligned with our values and intentions.
It sounds simple, but I imagine it's a lot harder in practice.
It definitely takes effort.
Yeah.
But remember, even small steps in the right direction can make a big difference. 5 minutes of meditation, a moment of mindful breathing during a stressful situation, a conscious choice to respond with kindness rather than reactivity. These seemingly small acts can have a ripple effect on our lives.
So it's about embracing the journey, those little wins, and trusting that the more we practice, the more those moments of peace, clarity, and freedom will naturally unfold.
Beautifully said. And who knows what other wonders await us on that path.
What an inspiring thought to leave our listeners with.
I think so.
I think that's the perfect note to end our deep dive on.
Thank you for guiding us through this exploration.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us on the deep dive. May your journey toward no mind be filled with discovery growth and perhaps even a little bit of beauty along the way. You are about to share some final thoughts for our listeners as we wrap up our deep dive into Osho's teachings on witnessing and no mind.
I think the most important takeaway is this whole journey is about progress, not perfection. You don't have to become some enlightened being overnight to benefit from these practices.
Yeah, we've all had those moments, haven't we, where things just click into place.
Right.
And we feel that sense of peace and clarity.
Right.
It's like a glimpse into what's possible.
Exactly. And those moments can be incredibly motivating, encouraging us to keep exploring, keep practicing,
Right.
and keep deepening our understanding of these concepts.
And we've talked about some practical tools for doing that.
Right.
Mindfulness meditation, bringing awareness to our everyday activities,
Right.
and really paying attention to how our thoughts and emotions are impacting us.
Hmm.
But it sounds like there's also an element of self-discovery involved in this journey.
Absolutely. Cultivating no mind isn't just about learning a set of techniques.
Right.
It's about getting to know ourselves on a deeper level, understanding our own patterns of thought and behavior,
Yeah.
and developing a more compassionate and accepting relationship with our minds.
So it's less about fighting our thoughts and more about understanding them, seeing them as data points rather than dictators.
Precisely. And as we become more aware of those patterns,
Yeah.
we naturally start to create more space for those moments of no mind to arise.
Okay.
Those moments where we're not completely consumed by the mental chatter.
Which brings us to a question I've been pondering.
Okay.
If no mind isn't about erasing thoughts, how do we distinguish between using the mind as a tool, as we've been discussing, and being used by it?
Right.
Seems like a tricky balance.
It is. And there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But I think a good starting point is to simply notice how you feel when you're engaged in thought.
Okay.
Are you feeling energized and focused, or stressed and drained?
So if we find ourselves constantly spiraling down a rabbit hole of worry or negativity,
Yeah.
that's a good indicator that our minds might have taken the wheel.
Exactly. It's like being on autopilot, reacting to situations based on old programming, rather than responding consciously from a place of clarity and awareness.
And the more we practice witnessing, the easier it becomes to recognize those patterns and make a conscious choice about how we want to respond.
Precisely. And that's where the real freedom lies, in that ability to choose.
So, in a nutshell, what would you say are the key ingredients for cultivating no mind and integrating it into our daily lives?
I'd say it comes down to three things.
Okay.
Awareness, acceptance, and action. Awareness of our thoughts and feelings,
Yeah.
acceptance of those thoughts and feelings without judgment,
Right.
and action aligned with our values and intentions.
It sounds simple, but I imagine it's a lot harder in practice.
It definitely takes effort, but remember, even small steps in the right direction can make a big difference. 5 minutes of meditation,
Yeah.
a moment of mindful breathing during a stressful situation,
Yeah.
a conscious choice to respond with kindness rather than reactivity.
Right.
These seemingly small acts can have a ripple effect on our lives.
So it's about embracing the journey, those little wins, and trusting that the more we practice, the more those moments of peace, clarity, and freedom will naturally unfold.
Beautifully said. And who knows what other wonders await us on that path.
What an inspiring thought to leave our listeners with. I think that's the perfect note to end our deep dive on.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Osho's teachings.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Please like, share and subscribe.